Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 373 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to expand our red and green science substantially. Enjoy. So we have a setup we need to do, and it's probably going to be similar to what we've already done here. Basically, yeah, it's not going to have the same amount of power poles or lights, but the idea is the same, and the input can totally be done on one giant string of machines if we really wanted to, but we have a space we need it to fit in, either down here or up here, and I'm not sure which one would be better. Well, it would be more compact to do it down here, so let's just grab a big old sequence of machines for now. Of course, it has yellow belts in there. It probably would be fine with yellow belts, but since we're not carrying those anymore, we probably shouldn't use them. And if we added substations to this, it would not actually make it any smaller, but it would take up space. And these things are so big they only need to be on one side, but it looks a little cleaner if you kind of stagger them like this. And it looks like it's got some near and far side going on, but that's totally not required if it's being inserted on both sides like this. It does make it a little more symmetrical. And I think that is the copy. That side is missing there, but it would overlap on this side. So it would be something like this. So if we plop this right here, the wire reach would cover what we need. So sure, we might as well, because we need to figure out how many of these we can fit. And that's only 32 of them. And it does fit. So let's do one more. 48. Yeah. It basically fits. We might have to chop some bits off to make it go in there properly. But, well, yeah, actually I think it would. That road would probably be on the bottom, but the space it takes up would be the same. So yeah, I think this would work, and I guess we'll just leave the farm there. It's doing work. Well, let's make this a little more copyable, because we won't need that there. Plus, let's just plop that on the end so there's no flashing. So that gets us up to 96. And then we do it 2 more times. And we're up to 192, which is basically what we need. So that is what we would require for our green science. And it's a heck of a lot bigger than what we have now. But compared to the rest of the factory, it's just one more thing in a sea of machines. So it's actually not that bad. Now that we have something here, we need to figure out the other parts of it. So we kind of need to do all of this, but I guess we can make that done. And it's nice having top tier everything, so now we can just plan for ideal situations because we have it. And those 4 belts would be the output of the green science, which would go on the bus because it would just barely fit. Okay, so now we need to figure out how to do this in a way that is long and narrow like this rather than nice and wide and phallic. The phallic works, but something like this would be a lot narrower if it was folded in on itself and it was more square. And since we're doing very large setups now, that is something we need to concern ourselves with. Where we have that, it needs to have 2 of its plate choppers on each side. Having the belt kind of go down the middle like this for both choppers would make sense, because then we can do the next stage of choppers, which would be the copper ones on this side, and then they would just share that input belt. Then we would need to make this, and I suppose it would look more symmetrical if it was right in the middle there. And then we have 2 more stages, one with lead choppers, so we'll just try to do it symmetrically here. And in fact, we can just copy the whole thing so we get the positioning. So it would be lead right there going into that stage, and then the last one is right there, and it has its iron choppers, and specifically it would be these sped up ones, just so it looks symmetrical. It actually creates 220 of these, which is quite a lot, although it's doable with cursed inserters. So we can use our extra long inserters, and we have to be very careful that they will actually properly line up, because if we do something like this, it straight up misses. But let's try a pick up by 3 and drop by 2 setup, which means those would reach and they don't lose any speed. And then a pick up by 2, drop by 3 setup right here. They're phasing into each other, but they all reach, and they look as symmetrical as something like this could look. And also, the belt goes through. So this is our output belt, so we'll want to place items on it from the other direction. And on the surface, it's going to look pretty similar, really. Let's try to copy something to make it look symmetrical. It would basically be this. It would have the same output with a long-handed inserter in the same spot, but the machines have different recipes now. And it also has 2 sets of choppers. And we can make this way more dense if we turn it on its side. It's less expandable, but are we really ever going to expand this now? Probably not, because we would need way more of these labs, which would in itself take up more space that's probably not going to be available. So we can pick everything up, figure out a more appropriate place. How about just 2 spaces to play it safe? It's always nice to play it safe when it comes to this stuff. And as far as I can tell, that's the setup. Pretty straightforward. Okay then, time to pull this out and get it placed. Let's get out of range of this. Man, we have a lot of robots now. Look at that. But they charge very quickly. Well, we're going to need a lot of this space here, so rip more trees. And rocks, but no one cares about rocks. So this is going to be our road. Might as well put it right up here. And just extend it all the way to the end. It's weird seeing the natural alien terrain underneath. We do occasionally see it. Sorry, but road's closed. And there is actually a robot hole here, which is a little of a problem, but looks like this just barely fits in here. How about we put it over here so we can fill that hole in? And then we need to disconnect it and connect it back. So yeah, these substations here are powering slightly some of these assemblers, but it's fine. As long as the 2 electrical networks aren't combined, then it's fine, and they are separate. It's actually kind of amazing it's 3.5 megawatts, even when it's separated, but that's just the robot zones. Okay, we need to connect all this, so we'll put that in there. Okay, I think we can leave this here for now. We can hook everything up once we've gotten it figured out. Also, though, I noticed that we could potentially make this setup a lot smaller if we had green science over here, red science over here, and then this space in the middle down here was used by the element of red science to make its items. And in fact, we could reuse some of these belts. So let's assume that the belt is going to come from above and to the left when we figure out this build. Well, it's a lot simpler, but I think copper will be right here, which will be easier with their 2 machines. And then iron with 3. Let's just make them all look the same. So the input belt would come down, and then the output. And we could put them on each side, but it potentially might not fit very well here. Plus, this already works just fine, so if we just kind of put it in here, it would be cool. And then it would be done similar to this, where the belt would go across. Okay. Well, we'll place that wherever it makes sense. But now we need to do our setup with 157 machines. The style is essentially the same, but doing it with 1 less row won't work. So instead, we are going to have to shrink it down to about here. It would be on the other side, so we'll just do a flip and basically be something like that. Close enough. Okay, unfortunately though, it means we have to pick this up and move it. Man, they're fast. Whew. Both our robots and the factories as well. But anyway, we got our setup. And I believe it had the undergrounds touching the hazard concrete. And this would be 2 spaces with what's next to it. So we'll do that. And then here is the green science. Of course, rocks and trees are in the way, but it would be like this. And the input belt would be like that somewhere, so if we put it something like this, yeah, that seems to be a good use of space. So we'll plop it in there. Of course, we gotta be very careful with these, and I disconnected that, which is not good. because we want to disconnect it right there. And all these, of course, need to be red science. I am glad with the space extension that they gradually are dropping you into these huge research requirements. If it was right at the beginning and they're like 2 million red science, then it would be really intimidating. But instead they're doing one at a time, so every time you complete one of those researches, you can just upgrade the next science. And then before you know it, you will have upgraded all of them to be crazy. Now we need the final bit. So the input's going to be from the left. And we might as well line up the output belt. And plenty of room here, so we'll just give it some spaces. And robot parking spaces, charge pads, all that good stuff. So that seems pretty good. Now we just have to get all the resources in here. Okay, we've got most of this placed. I guess first we can disconnect the input resources for the science packs. And just throw everything in there. And that's a nice clean assortment of coils. All of which are very space efficient. But let's see how this works. It's going to be very fast, but looks like these inserters are the wrong way. There we go. It was very quick. Alright then. Let's test red science. So everything gets shot in, and let's see. Yep, rate calculator seems to think this is correct. It's going to be an enormous amount of power for all of this. In fact, we can actually check that it's 3.5 gigajoules for just these two types of science. So it's quite stupendous, but it's filling up very quickly on science packs. Let's try this side now. Check the numbers again. They make sense. All the belts make sense. It's just those inserters. You know something is moving, but you can't really see what they're doing. That's about as fast as they possibly can be. Most of the time when you have inserters move, you can at least see what they're holding, but I think you'd have to pause the video to see what's in their hands. Even so, when you look at the actual input, it's barely touching these coils. Now it is kind of consuming quite a few boards, but for logistics reasons we're just going to use them as is rather than deliver the individual resources, because that would require items that aren't currently being delivered here. It's looking good, we need to let that fill up. But what it does mean though, is that we no longer need this other setup, which is going to create an enormous amount of junk when we pick it all up. Gotta try not to break anything when we do this. And there's definitely like dump warehouses here for junk. So a lot of this is going to have to be replaced, but we'll find out what needs to be replaced by what makes it into the junk warehouse eventually. And in our inventory, of course. Might as well clean all these up too, since we don't need it anymore. So now the next thing we need to deal with is upgrading our lab snake. And the lab snake does have a limiting factor in that these are only red belts, and they have different items on each side. Whereas our plan is to have an entire green belt of output. So we would need to have twice as many belts, which would reduce the density of this setup even further. And the density is actually already kind of low as is. I mean, it's fine, but we don't want to keep doing it. Not to mention that there is some inefficiency when it comes to daisy chaining labs like this, that the labs do flicker as the inserters pick up resources and move them around. So ideally, we just kind of want to avoid that. And this is the perfect opportunity to build something better. And I do have something better. We're going to use bots for this. So it's a pattern that can tile, but first we'll place it down to show how it works. At the very center of it kind of shows you the base building block. It's basically a plus sign of labs, where there is one logistics chest, and I just decided on a stack of every science pack. That's probably too much, and in fact, we definitely don't want to have 2,000 space science. Just have 200 of each. That's probably a lot of buffer, more than we need, but whatever. I would hate for the labs to flicker off because the bots haven't gotten there yet, and I would also hate to have to update so many of these if any of these settings were changed. So how it works is there's just one inserter and it's direct inserted. As you see, it's already starting because we had extra packs. And this right here is an incredibly dense way of doing science compared to what we have before. This is 20 labs taking up the space of less than 12. And yeah, when you're done with the tile, you're going to need to add in the missing labs and remove the extra ones. But that is something we can do. So for now, I think I will leave our original snake here because we might want to do other research, like certainly once we start launching rockets. Although saving the space science is essentially what we want to do. There are some researches that require space science that we would want to do first, like the jetpack and the final inventory upgrade. Other than that, the rest of it is just infinite research, which we may or may not want to do. It certainly gets expensive quick. And anything that's not towards our ultimate goal of the faster than light research is just wasting time. So we would only want to do any of those researches if we felt like it would actually save us time in the long run. And right off the bat, I can't really see how any of that would. It's all quality of life stuff. But we might want to do some research when we get that space science. So let's leave the original snake here and just cut it off. And this is going to create a bunch of science packs stuck in the network, but they will immediately be sucked back into these labs, so it's not an issue. So let's delete the snake here. It's a mighty amount of resources, and we need to get rid of all this too. It's kind of hard to imagine that what we're about to build is going to be even more dense than this. So kind of another question is how many labs do we even want? And honestly, who knows? That's so many robots. That's not really our concern right now, because we can put these labs anywhere. That if we run out of space here, we can put them here or right here, and just use drones to deliver the packs and get them close to where they need to be, and then have logistics robots handle the rest of it. And that's kind of what our plan is here. Although the one aspect about this design that is not in there is the fact that it needs to have a robot zone in there every once in a while. But our zones are so big, does it even matter? Because even with no zones at all, it will fit perfectly fine in this slot. So we need to get this in here. Hopefully we don't get run over. It's a lot happening, but here we go. Lots and lots of labs. Well, that gets us up to there. And then the last bit here is annoying, because first we have to go around the edge, picking up these inserters that go nowhere. And then probably the easiest way of handling the extra labs is just to wait until we find out which labs don't have science packs, and then we'll instantly know which ones are the extras without having to stare at the pattern. And that's probably more labs than we started with. I don't exactly remember. I think we had around 800, and I guess that's 700, so technically we need more, but for now we'll go with that. So the science setup is mostly seated now. That is a lot of labs and not a lot of space, but now that it's here, we can see which labs are the extra ones. So now if we want to build more of these, we can hopefully just place more of this block rather than having to use that pattern. Meanwhile, progress is slowly but surely continuing. It looks like about 2 more of the silos are about to be done. So right now we need to deliver all of our science packs into this setup. We might need to do our own little delivery bus here. Well, that's what 8 of them would look like. So how about we design something that can pull off from those 8 belts and get them into provider chests here and kind of put them along here just so the robots have the least amount of flying to do. So it's kind of 2 elements. One of them is the delivery of the packs themselves. And who knows exactly what kind of output we want. And I suppose it makes sense to make these buffer chests so that junk has somewhere to go. Because we also might want to do robot logistics. Certainly for the space science we would, but also potentially for some of the other ones. Okay, I think I got the splitter here. That splits 7 incoming belts to put them in there. And then the last one is just a space science. But because I don't want to like figure out which belt goes where and I just want to be able to pick one, let's just do passive providers for all of these. That way the on condition can be anything and less than, how about 1,000 packs? So I'm pretty sure all these are lined up. And I guess we can kind of test it here, where we can see that all of them are connected. So they can be any distance they need to be to work. And let's see, we need to figure out how often we want to place these. Placing them every single group seems a little excessive. So how about we have them lined up with every other group? That should be a sufficiently average delivery point. And then we also need to get these in, and luckily it's the right size. Everything seems to be good. And this will work as long as we're doing our science here. If we want to do it somewhere else, then we'll probably have to use robot logistics or drones or something like that. But anyway, for now, that's our delivery bus, which means we can bring each resource in as required and just kind of pick a spot to use them. It's time to see if our setup works here. Well, I was about to connect these, but then, wait a second, we don't have any belts. So we need to grab some from there. But here we go. And the pickup request is coming. So it doesn't really matter which chests get these. As long as these belts are basically going at full blast, then we have enough labs. One problem our factory has is that our logistics bots crash faster than we can build them because we have so many of them, which is actually kind of a problem. I did do a little bit of research with swarm safety. With every research, it makes 500 bots safe from crashing, but it gets expensive quickly. So 1,000 of our bots are safe, so if it ever gets that low, then they'll stop crashing. We're going to need a lot more, and they're certainly coming. It's kind of funny seeing the robots slowly enter the fray here. Well, power consumption is growing in these labs. 10 gigawatts of research. Well, and actually, they're all green now. So we have hit maximum performance. Now they just need to fill in all the buffers, which is going to take a little bit of time. But ultimately, it's actually not that many robots when you think about it. Of course, it's only 2 science packs, but they're managing. So now the big question is, how much research is this actually doing? So we'll select everything. And it's 23.66, which means we need at least triple to maximize our output. And that is worrisome because it's already using 10 gigawatts, which means that if we want to do research at this rate, we're going to need 30 gigawatts of labs in addition to everything else that supports them. That is terrifying. But here we are. And we could always build more of these. In the previous episodes when I was mentioning fuel, that uranium fuel is very limited based on how much of it you process. But when you get to plutonium, you could generate as much plutonium as you want. And I think I calculated that our setup will make about 200 gigawatts of plutonium power with this. And thorium power is the same way. You can make as much of it as you want. You're only limited on the curium. And I even took out the productivity modules out of these machines that make the fuel because it just seems so powerful that we did not need them. And clearly we don't because they're not running. But that's always an option too. Productivity modules are pretty much completely broken when it comes to the nuclear fuels. Research is happening at least twice as fast as it was before, even with just these labs. And we've got 101 of them left. But of course we'd want even more than that. Well, now that we have a more copyable setup, let's select all of it. So we'll place it down here, and we can also put more labs in between all of this, if that makes sense. But for now, let's try to maintain at least most of that patch in case we need that coal for something. So how about we do this? It's just so nuts how much research we're going to need to do. This thing is just going to instantly start running the second that it's placed, so we're not really saving ourselves anything by waiting to put this belt down. So because of that, we might as well just place it now. And as this stuff gets placed, power requirements are just going to keep increasing. 13 gigawatts for the labs now. The good news is that once we have all these placed, the power requirements won't really increase anymore, at least not for the labs, because they use the same amount of power regardless of how many packs they're actually consuming. So it looks like we're getting some hiccups in our science now, which is good to know, because we shouldn't be. It should be one solid belt. 44.8 of these coils right here, and we could only do 37.5 of them on one belt. So we need to do a patch. And I guess we could just use a red belt for this. It's going to be annoyingly dirty, but has to be done. And we'll put these here just to help max out this one machine on the end. The coils make it to the back, and that should get rid of the belt issue. Now all those should be maxed out. We're also not seeing completely maxed out green science either, so let's see if something exists here as well. Well, not from an input side. That could just be a belt balancing issue, because red is still kind of doing it. There we go. That is so much cleaner, and should essentially accomplish the same thing. Well, red's been going a while, and that belt sure looks compressed to me. Oh, that was close. I don't know, actually. I might have survived it with this many energy shields, and roboports don't have enough power, but it's not a battery thing. They just get completely drained when robots come into charge. I wonder what the duty cycle is of the reactors now. Oh, that's not good. So it turns off here and then turns on there, so that's about 80%. Which I suppose makes sense with our power consumption being above 20 gigawatts. So, when these labs get placed, we might need even more power. But research is certainly going faster now. It's kind of funny how fast our robots are crashing. And the mod that does that is the robot attrition mod, which makes it so robots randomly crash. And it actually adds up quite a bit over time. It makes it so robots aren't this infinite resource that just solves all your problems because they last forever. That they actually crash and need to be replaced. And for a while there, we were losing them faster than we could make them. So I upgraded all of the robot factories to make them a lot faster. But it has caught up again. And sand continues to be consumed. Now we're down to 490,000. We are still getting the occasional hiccup from our red science here. And I'm not terribly sure why. Well, they only do 74, so that might be it. Whereas these ones do also 74, so technically they're not maxing out the belt. That is slightly triggering that I did that. Not terribly sure how I did that, because it's 192 machines, and our setup was asking for 189. Now I am confused. Although, you know what? It probably just comes down to whenever it randomly gets the tick for the bonus item. And whenever that happens, it just kind of spurts. Or it could be that there's just a tiny error in calculations that just takes scales like this to find out. But it is what it is. I will continue to go by Helmod's calculations. I trust Helmod to not lie to me. And it looks like we're consuming all our science, but we're really not. They're just filling up all these buffers. So work continues, but that is a lot of labs to build, so this is going to take a little while. And the lubricant remains short, but now these things are actually maxing themselves out. And that one on the end is temporarily maxing itself out on the mineral oil, but that's because it got to 20%. But that 20% might be an issue because it's never making it to these ones in the back. So let's do 50%. 20% is very useful for having the largest delta between tanks are too low and tanks are too high. But 20% is certainly low enough that you can run into production rate problems. Because I call it, it doesn't have enough pressure in the system. It's not really pressure, but you can kind of think of it as the same way. If the pressure is low here, it's going to be very low by the time it gets here. So by increasing it to, say, 50%, it retains a higher pressure and the fluid is still there. But it's not really pressure, but it's kind of how I think of it in my head, about how you can run into throughput problems. And I think the bot count is continuing to go down. That's kind of nuts. It's also another reason why I shouldn't be making the fusion-powered robots, is because they'd probably all disappear eventually. Robots are an expendable resource in this factory. And actually, in that sense, perhaps upgrading them to Tier 4 was entirely unnecessary because they all would have just died out over time anyway. There are a couple things we can do. Besides making the cargo bigger, we could also just make the robots faster. That would mean we would need less robots for the same amount of work. And it's a pretty big increase. Although consuming space science packs is science that isn't going towards beating the game, compared to 2 million science, what is spending 25k on this, 20k on that? It adds up, certainly, but you can do a few of the researches without having a significant impact. Now that a lot of this is kind of calming down, I'm ready to start removing these warehouses and get the resources kind of consolidated so we can figure out what we want to do with them. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, it's the big day where we start launching rockets, as well as upgrading our blue sites. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.